There are stories that are not meant to be told. Pause. But remembered. Some truths do not arrive through language. They arrive through silence. The canonical Gospels, though vast in their theological horizon, are curiously silent about the earliest years of Jesus of Nazareth, from his birth in Bethlehem to his emergence as a young adult teaching in the temple. Scripture offers only fragments, glimpses rather than a biography. This silence has provoked centuries of fascination. What, one may ask, is concealed within the hidden decades of the Messiah's childhood? In Matthew and Luke, the infancy narratives end abruptly. The shepherds depart, the Magi return to their homeland, and soon the child and his family vanish into the quiet rhythms of Nazareth. Only once more, in Luke chapter 2 verses 41 to 52, does the evangelist lift the veil, the 12-year-old Jesus, found among the teachers in the temple, speaking with a wisdom beyond his years. And then, nothing. For nearly 2 decades, the Word made flesh remains unrecorded, growing in wisdom and stature, and in favor with God and men. Luke chapter 2 verse 52. Why did the early church leave such silence? Some scholars, like Raymond E. Brown, interpret it as intentional theological restraint. The evangelists sought to focus not on psychology or biography but on revelation. The Gospels are not chronicles but proclamations of faith, kerygma. To narrate every event would be to domesticate the mystery of the Incarnation. As John's Gospel insists, there are also many other things which Jesus did, were every one of them to be written. The world itself could not contain the books. John chapter 21 verse 25. Yet silence itself can be revelatory. In apophatic theology, the theology of divine hiddenness, absence is not emptiness but a form of speech. God speaks through what he withholds. Thus, the unspoken childhood of Jesus becomes a sacred pause, a holy ellipsis in the narrative of salvation. The Word, before preaching, must dwell in obscurity. The Logos must learn the language of men before he can redeem it. In modern times, this biblical silence has invited both reverence and speculation. Some believers receive it as divine mystery. Others seek to fill the gaps through imagination. Apocryphal tales, or even contemporary testimonies, like that of the Niño de Cuatro Años who claims to remember what the Bible omits. The story of such a child touches a deep nerve in the Christian imagination. Could the voice of innocence carry the echo of divine memory? The silence of Scripture is thus not merely historical but existential. It mirrors the believer's own experience of faith, an encounter with the God who is both revealed and hidden, who speaks yet also withholds. To approach this silence requires not curiosity alone but reverence, not analysis alone but listening. The 4-year-old's testimony, then, is not a challenge to the Gospels but a mirror of their mystery. In daring to speak where Scripture is silent, the child forces theology to confront its own limits. Can revelation still happen? And if so, through what voices? Thus begins our inquiry. The path ahead will move between canonical text and apocryphal imagination, psychology and pneumatology, history and symbol. In tracing the contours of what the Bible leaves unsaid, we seek not to complete the silence, but to understand why it was necessary. Night has fallen. A faint oil lamp flickers over a wooden table, its trembling light dancing across old parchments and weathered scrolls. These are not the scriptures we know, but whispers from forgotten centuries. Voices that once tried to tell what the Bible chose to keep in silence. Through the ages, beyond the 4 Gospels, many other writings appeared, the Apocrypha, the hidden or forbidden books. They were read in secret, copied by hand, and kept alive by small communities that refused to believe that God had spoken only once. In the infancy Gospel of Thomas, they say the young Jesus played by a stream, molding sparrows out of clay. Then, with a breath, he gave them life, and they flew away. A simple story, yet full of mystery. It shows not a distant divinity, but a child touched by creation itself, learning, perhaps, what it means to be both God and boy. Another text tells of him healing a friend, and even reviving a life he had hurt in anger. Such stories make us tremble. Could power so divine rest in hands so small? Could God himself have learned to hold back his own strength as he grew among us? The church did not keep these stories, not out of disdain, but discernment. They were human attempts to fill a silence that might never have been meant to be filled. For some mysteries are not gaps to be explained. They are doors that must remain closed, so that faith may still be possible. And yet, in this quiet hour, as the wind turns the pages of forgotten parchment, we sense something tender behind the words. A human longing to touch the divine. Perhaps the Apocrypha are not lies, but sighs. The yearning of souls who wanted to see the hidden face of God. The lamp fades. The scent of old leather and ink lingers in the air. And we understand. Not every truth is meant to be proven. Some are meant to be listened to. Like a story breathing softly in the silence of time. Some memories do not belong to us. They arrive like echoes from another age. Carried by silence, by dreams, by something in the soul that remembers what the mind has never known. The story of the little boy who claimed to remember what Scripture never told. The childhood of Jesus awakens this mystery within us. Could there be a memory older than our birth? A remembrance written before time began? Mystics have long spoken of it. They called it anamnesis, the sacred remembering, when the human heart recalls its origin in the divine. In that moment, memory is not just recollection, but communion, the soul touching the place from which it came. Perhaps that is what happens in such children. Their minds too new to doubt. Their hearts still open to the whisper of eternity. They do not invent, they remember. Like rivers remembering the sea. Their words flow towards something vast and ancient. Modern thought calls it imagination. Psychology names it the unconscious. But the mystics smile. They know that under every human dream lies the soft pulse of God's own memory. Imagine, then, a 4-year-old child. Eyes distant, voice gentle. Speaking of places he has never seen. Of a carpenter's house filled with light. Of laughter that feels like prayer. He does not try to convince, he simply knows. And in that knowing, we hear again the first breath of creation. The memory of love before all beginnings. When the night deepens and we lie still. Sometimes that same memory stirs within us. It does not speak in words, but in a quiet familiarity. As if we have been loved forever, and are only now remembering it. So let the darkness hold you gently. Let your thoughts drift like ancient rivers. And if, in your half-sleep, you sense a light remembering itself inside you, do not be afraid. It is only the soul, whispering the oldest story ever told. There is a silence that does not mean absence. It is the silence that breathes between words. The pause between heartbeats. The space where God hides. The ancient prophets knew this silence. Elijah searched for God in the wind, in the earthquake, in the fire. But the scriptures say, he was found in the still, small voice. A whisper so quiet that one had to be still to hear it. Theologians later called this mystery Deus absconditus, the hidden God, a God who conceals himself, not to punish, but to purify, a God who withdraws, so that love may be chosen freely. For if the divine were too visible, faith would become sight, and trust would vanish into certainty. So he hides, like the sun behind clouds, so that our hearts may learn to seek warmth, even when the light is unseen. The silence of Jesus' childhood is perhaps the most eloquent expression of this hiddenness. For 30 years, the Word who made the world spoke no recorded word. He lived, he learned, he waited. And that waiting, that quiet human growing, was itself a sermon louder than any miracle. To believe in the hidden God is to walk in the fog and still move forward. It is to pray when heaven feels closed, to keep the lamp burning when no answer comes. And in that persistence, faith becomes something more than comfort. It becomes love without proof. Mystics have said that God's silence is not the silence of absence, but the silence of presence too vast to be heard. Like the deep ocean that holds every sound. He is there. Not gone, but encompassing all. Perhaps that is what the little boy in our story touches. When he says he remembers what the Bible does not tell. He is not revealing new facts. He is remembering the quiet face of the hidden one. The God who dwells behind every curtain of unknowing. So tonight, when the room grows still, and your thoughts drift toward the dark, remember, the hidden God hides only to be sought, and seeks only to be found. The silence is not emptiness. It is invitation. Listen closely. Somewhere within that stillness, the infinite is whispering your name. Every word we speak carries a shadow of the first word. Long before human voices filled the air, there was silence. And then, the voice that said, "Let there be light." From that moment, all language became a trace of revelation. Each syllable, a fragile echo of creation's beginning. And yet, as centuries passed, words began to forget where they came from. They multiplied, divided, scattered, like stars losing their constellations. Still, deep within the soul, there remains a memory of that first voice. It is not heard by the ear, but by the part of us that remembers light. This is why, when someone speaks truth with gentleness, we feel something ancient stir. Not recognition of a new idea, but remembrance of something eternal. The mystics call it the language of the heart. A language older than speech, where knowing and loving are one. It is the place where revelation happens, not as thunder from the sky, but as a quiet returning to what we already are. Perhaps that is why a child can sometimes speak mysteries that scholars cannot explain. Children live close to the source. Their words are not yet tangled by logic or fear. They speak as if remembering something we have all forgotten. Imagine the 4-year-old again. He talks about the boy Jesus, about moments unrecorded in any book. Maybe he is not inventing a story. Maybe he is translating from the language of silence into the imperfect words of time. Revelation, after all, is not about new information. It is the awakening of memory. The soul remembering what it has always known of God. When the eternal touches the temporal, language trembles. The tongue becomes a doorway, and a single phrase can open an entire sky. So when you speak tonight, speak softly. Let your words carry light, not noise. Let them be bridges between what is seen and what is hidden. And when silence returns, do not fear it, for even the silence is still speaking. And sometimes, it says the most. Nazareth, a small village wrapped in sunlight and silence. Stone houses clinging to the hillside. Olive trees whispering in the wind. It is here, among the dust and laughter of ordinary days, that the divine chose to grow small. There are no chronicles of these years. No miracles recorded, no prophecies fulfilled. Only the slow rhythm of human life. The sound of wood being shaped by a carpenter's hands. The laughter of a child chasing light across the floor. We can only imagine. Perhaps, each morning, the young Jesus woke to the smell of bread baking, to the sound of his mother singing softly as she worked. Perhaps he carried water from the well, watched Joseph repair a door, and listened to the stories of their people. Stories of a God who led them through deserts, who spoke in burning bushes and whispered on the wind. And maybe, as he listened, he felt that same voice stir inside him. A faint memory of the one who had spoken light into being. But he said nothing. He grew, he learned, he waited. For even God, when he becomes human, must learn the language of time. The villagers saw nothing unusual. A boy helping his father. A son obedient to his mother. Eyes bright with questions. But within those questions, the infinite was slowly awakening to itself. Theologians call this kenosis, the self-emptying of God, to become one of us. He laid aside the weight of glory, and entered the fragile simplicity of childhood. Not to pretend, but to experience. to know hunger, wonder, fatigue, and joy. When we try to imagine his childhood, we are not seeking history. We are seeking empathy. Because every child, in some small way, carries a spark of the divine learning to be human. So perhaps, in Nazareth's quiet mornings, as Jesus helped lift a beam of wood, he smiled without knowing that one day, another beam would lift him. The carpenter's son was already building the bridge between heaven and earth, one humble day at a time. Tonight, as you rest, picture that village at dusk. The sound of crickets, the fading light on stone walls, a mother calling her son in for supper. Nothing miraculous, and yet, everything sacred. In that ordinariness, God was already here, growing quietly among us. There are voices that speak loudly, and there are voices that tremble softly, barely touching the edge of sound. The voice of a child belongs to the latter. It does not command attention. It invites it. When a child speaks, the world slows down. We listen, not for information, but for something purer, something that comes before explanation. It is as if innocence itself were borrowing words, just long enough to remind us of what we once knew by heart. In the scriptures, Jesus once said, "Unless you become like little children, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven." Many read this as moral advice, but perhaps it was more a metaphysical truth. Children do not yet see the world as divided. They live in wholeness, where wonder is still a form of prayer, and curiosity is a kind of faith. The 4-year-old in our story, when he speaks of the boy Jesus, is not claiming authority. He is remembering the language of beginnings, a tongue woven from light and trust. He does not reason his way toward revelation. He drifts into it, like a leaf carried by a gentle current. Adults, in our striving for certainty, often forget how to listen. We measure, analyze, dissect, until mystery slips through the cracks of comprehension. But the child listens differently. He listens with the heart, as though silence itself were whispering to him. There is a sacred humility in such listening. It is not about knowing more, but about knowing less, enough to be amazed again. And in that amazement, truth finds room to enter. Perhaps that is why God so often hides his wisdom in small voices and simple gestures. A laugh, a question, a glance toward the sky. Because only when our hearts grow quiet enough can we hear the echo of eternity ringing in the ordinary. So when the child says, "I remember what the Bible does not tell," we should not rush to correct him. Maybe what he remembers is not history, but home. Maybe his voice is not revelation from above, but remembrance from within. Tonight, listen to the small voice inside you, the one that still believes without proof, that still wonders without fear. For in that voice, the divine is still speaking, softly, like a child calling your name in a dream. There are truths that wake us, and there are truths that can only be seen when our eyes are closed. Dreams, perhaps, are the language of that second kind, the whispering of the soul when reason has fallen asleep. In dreams, time forgets itself. The borders between past and future, heaven and earth, become thin as mist. And sometimes, through that mist, something eternal slips in, a message too tender for the waking mind. The child's voice in our story, "I remember what the Bible does not tell," feels like a dream spoken aloud. Not a dream born of sleep, but one carried from a deeper place, where memory and mystery meet. The ancient mystics often said that creation itself is God's dream, a vision breathed into being, a story unfolding within divine imagination. If that is true, then every human dream is a small echo of that first dreaming, a spark from the great mind that still hums beneath all existence. Dreams do not argue, they reveal. They show without explaining, teach without insisting. Like parables, they invite interpretation, not to trap us in meaning, but to set meaning free. In a dream, a child can speak with the wisdom of prophets. In a dream, the ordinary becomes luminous. A cup of water turns into a mirror of eternity. And when we wake, we are left with a strange ache, as if we have touched something vast, and then forgotten its shape. Maybe faith works the same way. It is not about certainty, but about remembering a truth glimpsed once. In a half-forgotten dream, we spend our lives trying to recall it. That brief moment when everything made sense. Not because we understood, but because we belonged. So perhaps revelation is not thunder from heaven, but a dream that refuses to fade. The kind that lingers in your heart all day. Like a song you can't quite remember, but somehow, it remembers you. When night falls and your eyes grow heavy, do not rush away from your dreams. Let them unfold like sacred pages. For sometimes, when the world grows quiet, truth finds its softest voice and speaks to us in sleep. Silence is not the absence of sound. It is a presence too full to be spoken. It holds the weight of everything that words cannot carry. The hush before creation. The stillness after a prayer. When the scriptures fall silent about the childhood of Jesus. It is not forgetting. It is reverence. Because sometimes, what is most sacred is not meant to be narrated, but simply known in quiet. The mystics have always understood this. John of the Cross called it the dark night of the soul. A silence so deep that even faith feels like falling. But he also said, that very darkness is the shadow of God's wings. In silence, revelation does not disappear. It deepens. The absence of voice becomes the presence of mystery. And like the child who listens before speaking, the soul begins to hear things that cannot be heard with ears. Think of the moments in life when words fail. Grief too heavy, beauty too vast, love too fierce. In those moments, silence becomes sacred space, a sanctuary where the divine moves unseen. Perhaps that is why the hidden years of Jesus were wrapped in quiet. Each day in Nazareth, the silence was not empty. It was ripening. The Word was learning the rhythm of humanity, so that when he finally spoke, every syllable would carry eternity within it. We, too, live between silences. The silence before birth, and the silence after death. What happens in between is one long attempt to remember what those silences already know. To dwell in silence is not to escape the world. It is to listen for the pulse of God within it. The heart becomes the temple. The breath becomes the psalm. And every pause becomes a prayer. So tonight, do not rush to fill the quiet. Let it speak. For in that stillness, you may find that revelation is not a voice from above, but a whisper within. A soft reminder that God's silence has always been the sound of his nearness. Time. It moves like water. Soft, unstoppable, carrying us from birth to death. From the first breath to the last whisper. We live inside its flow, measuring our days with clocks and calendars, forgetting that time itself was once unmeasured. Before the world began, there was no ticking, no turning of suns. There was only being, the eternal now of God. When he said, "Let there be light," he did not only create brightness, he created time itself, the rhythm by which creation would unfold. Eternity is not endless time. It is the absence of time. It is the still point around which all moments turn, the quiet heart of all becoming. And yet, somehow, the eternal entered time and took the name Jesus. When God became man, the timeless learned to count days. The infinite accepted limitation. He grew older, waited for seasons, felt the slow passage of human hours. Through him, time was no longer something to escape, but something to sanctify. Every moment, then, is not merely passing. It is being touched by eternity. Each breath, a doorway. Each second, a spark from the timeless flame. And when we live with awareness, time stops feeling like a river that carries us away, and begins to feel like an ocean. We are slowly remembering. Perhaps that is what holiness truly is. To live time as if it were already eternal. To fold the infinite into the ordinary. To find heaven not later, but here, hidden in this heartbeat, this glance, this fleeting instant of being alive. When we sleep, time softens. Dreams erase the border between now and always. In that softness, we glimpse what eternity feels like. Not a place beyond time, but a presence within it. So tonight, as the minutes drift like quiet stars across your room, do not fear their passing. Each one carries a secret. It is not moving away from you, but deeper into God. For in the end, there is no past or future. Only the eternal now, forever held in the hands of love. Light is the first word of creation. Let there be light. But hidden within that light was its twin, shadow. For without darkness, light cannot be seen. And without contrast, truth cannot be known. We often think of darkness as the enemy of light, as the absence of all that is holy. But in the beginning, before light was spoken, there was darkness, and God called it good. The mystery of creation begins there. In the meeting of opposites, light reveals, darkness conceals. Yet both serve revelation. The one shows us what is, the other, what is not yet seen. In our lives, too, light and shadow dance together. Joy and sorrow, faith and doubt, clarity and confusion. They weave the fabric of our becoming. To reject one is to tear the cloth. The child in our story speaks with unguarded wonder, as if the boundary between light and dark had never hardened in him. He remembers what most of us forget, that the sacred hides not only in brightness, but also in shade. Mystics say that God dwells in a light so bright it appears as darkness, like staring into the sun. The brilliance blinds the eye, and so we call it night, when in truth, it is dawn unseen. Perhaps that is why revelation so often comes through the shadowed paths of life, through loss, silence, or longing, because in darkness, the heart becomes still enough to feel what cannot be seen. The absence becomes presence, and every ache becomes an opening. When Jesus hung upon the cross, the Gospels tell us that darkness covered the land. Yet in that moment, the truest light was born, a radiance that would not fade. The sun hid its face, so that love could be seen clearly. So tonight, if your world feels dim, do not rush to light every candle. Sit for a moment in the gentle dark. Let it hold you, as the night holds the stars. For even there, especially there, the divine is near. Light needs shadow to be understood. And in that sacred balance, we learn that darkness, too, is part of God's language. Every soul is a mirror, sometimes clear, sometimes clouded, but always reflecting something greater than itself. We were not made to hold light, but to return it. When God said, "Let us make man in our image," He was not carving statues. He was breathing mirrors into being, living surfaces upon which eternity might glance and see itself reflected in time. A mirror, though, does not create light. It only receives. Its power lies in openness, in the willingness to stay still, so that light may enter and reveal what is true. The child's voice, so pure, so unguarded, is like that kind of mirror. No dust of cynicism, no stain of calculation, only a quiet transparency, through which truth can pass unbroken. As we grow older, our mirrors gather dust. Fear fogs them, pride cracks them, and soon, we no longer see the divine face that looks back from within. We chase reflections in other mirrors. Approval, success, control, forgetting that the truest reflection was always shining softly inside. The mystics say the soul's journey is not about gaining light, but clearing away what hides it. Each act of love, each moment of forgiveness, polishes the mirror a little more. And slowly, beneath the grime of self, the image of God begins to gleam again. When Jesus lived among us, he was the perfect mirror, utterly open to the Father's light. To see him was to see love reflected without distortion. Not dazzling, not harsh, just pure radiance in human form. And yet, even that light was gentle. He did not blind, he illuminated. He showed us that holiness is not a spotlight, but a reflection, one heart shining quietly into another. So tonight, as the darkness settles around you, imagine your soul as a mirror, placed beneath the stars. You do not have to shine, only to receive. Let the stillness polish you. Let the divine light rest upon your surface, until you remember that you, too, were made to reflect heaven. For in every mirror that turns toward the light, the infinite sees itself, and smiles. Before there were words, there was sight. And before we learned to speak of God, he had already been looking at us, with eyes that see beyond what we hide, into what we are. The scriptures begin not with our gaze toward heaven, but with his gaze upon creation. And God saw that it was good. In that moment, the world received its first blessing, not through speech, but through being seen. To be seen by God is not to be exposed. It is to be understood. His gaze is not like ours, which measures, judges, and compares. It does not divide worth from unworthiness. It simply beholds, and in beholding, redeems. When Jesus looked upon people, they felt both known and loved. He saw fishermen, but also apostles. He saw sinners, but also children of light. His gaze was not an accusation. It was an awakening. The child in our story speaks as one who feels that gaze, not the heavy stare of religion, but the gentle recognition of a friend. Children are not afraid to be seen. They have not yet learned to hide. And perhaps that is why they reflect heaven so easily. They live inside the gaze of love. Mystics have said that prayer is not what we say to God, but what happens when we allow ourselves to be looked upon by him. In that stillness, we begin to see ourselves as he does, without shame, without masks, bathed in a light that heals. To live under that gaze is to live without fear. It is to walk knowing that every flaw, every shadow, is already included in the divine understanding. We are not observed from afar. We are held from within. Tonight, imagine that gaze resting upon you. Not demanding, not measuring, simply seeing. Let it fall upon the weary places of your heart. Let it soften what has hardened. You do not need to impress it, only to receive it. For in the eyes of God, you were never a problem to solve. You were always a story to love. The hands of a human being are small, but they carry the shape of creation. In them lies both tenderness and power. The power to heal, to build, to bless. When the scriptures speak of God's hands, they speak in poetry. Hands that formed the earth, that lifted dust and breathed life into it. And when God became man, those same hands learned to hold, to work, to comfort. Imagine the hands of the boy Jesus in Nazareth, dusty from helping his father, gentle from helping his mother, not yet performing miracles, but already learning compassion through touch. Every small act of care was a rehearsal of love divine. We often think of miracles as great interruptions. Water turning into wine, the dead returning to life. But perhaps miracles are simply what happens when divine love flows freely through human hands. A hand that lifts another from the ground, that wipes away a tear, that breaks bread for someone hungry. These are not lesser miracles. They are the quiet echoes of creation, renewing the world one gesture at a time. The mystics say that hands are the soul made visible. Through them, love becomes tangible. They are the instruments of incarnation, the bridge between spirit and matter, between heaven and earth. When Jesus later touched the blind and they saw, it was not magic. It was recognition. The touch reminded them of the hands that had once formed their very eyes. And so they remembered how to see again. Our own hands carry that same memory. Each palm, each line, is a map of giving and receiving. When we close them too tightly, the light cannot pass through. But when we open them, in trust, in service, in blessing, the miracle flows again. So tonight, look at your hands, not as tools, but as prayers shaped in flesh. They are how love moves, how faith takes form. The divine does not need thunder or spectacle, only a willing touch, a quiet kindness. For in the end, it is through human hands that God still chooses to hold the world. The hands of a human being are small, but they carry the shape of creation. In them lies both tenderness and power. The power to heal, to build, to bless. When the scriptures speak of God's hands, they speak in poetry. Hands that formed the earth, that lifted dust and breathed life into it. And when God became man, those same hands learned to hold, to work, to comfort. Imagine the hands of the boy Jesus in Nazareth, dusty from helping his father, gentle from helping his mother, not yet performing miracles, but already learning compassion through touch. Every small act of care was a rehearsal of love divine. We often think of miracles as great interruptions, water turning into wine, the dead returning to life. But perhaps miracles are simply what happens when divine love flows freely through human hands. A hand that lifts another from the ground, that wipes away a tear, that breaks bread for someone hungry. These are not lesser miracles. They are the quiet echoes of creation, renewing the world one gesture at a time. The mystics say that hands are the soul made visible. Through them, love becomes tangible. They are the instruments of incarnation, the bridge between spirit and matter, between heaven and earth. When Jesus later touched the blind and they saw, it was not magic, it was recognition. The touch reminded them of the hands that had once formed their very eyes. And so they remembered how to see again. Our own hands carry that same memory. Each palm, each line, is a map of giving and receiving. When we close them too tightly, the light cannot pass through. But when we open them, in trust, in service, in blessing, the miracle flows again. So tonight, look at your hands, not as tools, but as prayers shaped in flesh. They are how love moves, how faith takes form. The divine does not need thunder or spectacle, only a willing touch, a quiet kindness. For in the end, it is through human hands that God still chooses to hold the world. Every life is a journey, a path that winds through light and shadow, joy and ache, faith and forgetting. We walk it day by day, rarely seeing where it leads. And yet, every step brings us closer to where we began. The first sound we make in this world is not a word, but a breath. And from that breath onward, our feet begin their pilgrimage. From innocence to understanding, from seeking to surrender. The scriptures often speak of the path. Abraham walked it without knowing his destination. Moses walked it through deserts. Jesus walked it carrying a cross. And each of them discovered that the journey itself was the revelation. The path is holy not because of where it ends, but because of who walks beside us. Sometimes the road is straight and sunlit. Sometimes it narrows through valleys of shadow. But even then, especially then, grace leaves footprints beside ours. Soft, invisible, steady. The child in our story speaks of Jesus as if he walks with him. Maybe he does. Maybe faith is not a matter of believing in a distant figure, but of noticing the quiet companion who has never left our side. We are travelers through time, but our souls remember eternity. Each step we take echoes both directions, forward into the unknown, and backward into the memory of God. There will be moments when you feel lost, when the horizon disappears, and the ground beneath you falters. Do not fear. Every wandering has its purpose. Even detours are sacred, when walked with awareness. And when you tire, rest a while, for even stopping is part of the path. The rhythm of pilgrimage includes silence as much as motion. Each pause, each breath, is a step toward home. Tonight, imagine yourself walking a narrow road under starlight. You cannot see far ahead, but you keep moving, one quiet step at a time. And perhaps, in that steady walking, you begin to realize that the destination was never far away. It was within you all along. For the divine path is not a line to be completed, but a circle, each step returning us to the love from which we first began. Death is not the opposite of life. It is its completion, the quiet turning of the page. When the story has found its final sentence, we fear it because we mistake it for absence. But death, like night, is only another form of rest. When the body lays down its burden, the soul awakens to a wider horizon. In the scriptures, death is never the end, only a passage, a crossing of thresholds. He fell asleep, the texts often say, as if to remind us that every sunset holds a promise of dawn. Jesus himself entered death, not as a victim, but as a guide. He walked through that shadowed gate, so that none of us would walk it alone. And on the third day, the silence of the tomb became the first note of resurrection. What, then, is death, if not awakening to the side of reality that light had kept hidden? Like a dreamer rising into morning, the soul opens its eyes and finds the infinite waiting. The child in our story speaks with such ease about heaven, as though he has not forgotten that other shore. Perhaps children do not fear death, because they still remember where they came from. For them, life and afterlife are not two lands divided, but one continuous field of divine breath. To die is not to vanish. It is to be gathered, to return to the silence from which all voices were born, to step into the heart that has always been waiting. And those who remain, they grieve, but even grief is holy. It is love refusing to stop at the border of mortality. It is the echo of eternity, still sounding through human hearts. Tonight, if you think of those who have gone before you, do not picture them as lost. Picture them as awake, standing in a morning you cannot yet see, watching, smiling, their hands outstretched toward your path. For death is not the falling of darkness, but the lifting of the veil. And when that veil is drawn aside, the first thing every soul beholds is light, not blinding, but home. In the end, every journey leads home, not to a place, but to a state of being, a remembering of who we have always been. The soul travels far, through lifetimes of learning, through deserts of forgetting, through oceans of longing. And yet, after all its wanderings, it returns not as a stranger, but as a child. The scriptures say, unless you become like little children, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. Not because heaven is childish, but because heaven is simplicity. A heart unburdened, a trust without defense. The boy in our story, who spoke of what the Bible left unsaid, did not teach through knowledge. He reminded through presence. He carried in his small voice the echo of a truth older than words, that the divine never left us. We only outgrew our listening. To return as a child is to see again with unclouded eyes, to find wonder in the ordinary, and to feel the pulse of eternity in the rhythm of your own breath. It is to forgive without calculation, to laugh without reason, to love without needing to be right. It is to rest inside mystery, as easily as a bird rests in wind. We do not need to go upward to meet God. We need only to go inward, to the quiet place within, where the child still waits, untouched by time, unafraid of love. In that sacred returning, everything softens. The heavy armor of adulthood falls away. The masks of wisdom crumble into gentleness. And the voice that once said, "I must understand," now whispers, "I am home." For the child is not who we were. It is who we are beneath all else. It is the pure gaze through which God sees himself in us. Tonight, let that child awaken in you. Let its laughter rise through your chest. Its trust steady your heart. Its wonder heal your weary mind. You are not walking toward the divine. You are walking back into it. And when at last you arrive, you will realize you never truly left. The journey was only the remembering.